The cafe smelled like burnt sugar and old newspapers, the kind of smell that feels almost homey if you let it. I sat at my usual table by the window, the one that caught the morning sun just enough to warm my fingers through a chipped ceramic mug. My phone buzzed twice in the past 5 minutes, both notifications from apps I never opened, and I let them sit there. Some messages didn't need answering. Not yet. She was there before I noticed her fully, standing in line with the other half-asleep patrons. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands escaping like they didn't care about order. She glanced down at the menu and frowned, just slightly, and I felt the pull of curiosity tighten around my ribs. Something in the way her lips pressed together made me want to say something, anything, but I didn't. When she stepped up to order, I realized I knew her voice already. Soft, measured, with a subtle laugh that didn't quite leave her eyes. I watched her hands steady on the counter, long-fingered, but not trying to be graceful. There was a quiet assurance in how she moved that made me acutely aware of my own jittering fingers. I stirred my coffee a little too much, and the spoon clinked against the mug. She glanced over. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. It was nothing. And everything. I remember thinking, I could sit here forever and still never say hi. My own voice felt like a borrowed thing, hesitant and small. I noticed the tiny crease at the corner of her mouth when she smiled at the barista, and somehow it was enough to make me fold my napkin again, careful, unnecessary. She turned toward the window, and our eyes collided again. She didn't look away this time, just raised an eyebrow, a half-question hanging between us like cigarette smoke. I wanted to answer it, but words refused me. Instead, I traced the rim of my coffee cup with my thumb, slow, deliberate, pretending the warmth could anchor me. The cafe's clock ticked in a way that felt personal, echoing in my chest more than in the room. I caught snippets of her conversation with the barista, laughed quietly at something I couldn't hear, and then she was moving toward a table across from mine. Her bag swung lightly against her side, a paperback peeked out the top. I wondered if she knew she'd already stolen a part of my morning without saying a word. I wasn't sure why I noticed every small gesture, the brush of her sleeve, the tilt of her head when she read, the way she tapped the sugar packet twice before setting it down, but noticing her made the room feel both bigger and smaller at the same time. I kept my phone beside my cup, unsent messages blinking at me, remnants of half-thought conversations with people I hadn't called in months. My loneliness wasn't loud. It was the quiet kind that waits patiently in corners and empty chairs. She caught my gaze once more as she gathered her things to leave. I wanted to ask her name, ask if she came here often, ask if she had a husband, a dog, a life I couldn't imagine. But all I did was nod, faint, unconvincing, and she smiled, a little tilt of the lips, a soft exhale, and stepped out into the street. And then my phone buzzed again. A message. Not from a friend. Not from someone I knew. Just her name flashing on the screen, and a short line beneath it. Are you coming tonight? I stared at it, thumb hovering, heart stubbornly caught somewhere between disbelief and anticipation. I didn't reply for a long time. Just stared at the message, letting the words pulse in my chest. Eventually, I typed back the smallest thing I could think of. Which tonight? Her answer came immediately. 8 p.m., my place. It should have felt simple. It shouldn't have made my stomach twist in half, my mind racing through every improbable scenario. A woman in her 40s. 2 divorced sisters, she'd mentioned once in passing, the way people mention weather. And me, barely 20, fumbling through my life like a nervous apprentice. But it felt like stepping onto someone else's map without a compass. I showed up anyway. She opened the door before I could knock, hair still loose, eyes brighter than I remembered. You came, she said softly. No teasing, no judgment, just that quiet recognition that already made me unsteady. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of vanilla and old books. She handed me a cup of tea, her hands brushing mine for a moment longer than needed, and sat across from me at the small table. Steam curled between us. I sipped slowly, noticing the way she watched me take it, as if memorizing something I didn't know I was giving away. You always drink it this way? She asked. Voice casual, but not casual enough. I shrugged, looking down at the cup. Habit, I said. Tea is reliable. She smiled faintly. I understand that. There was a pause. And then, as if testing a fragile bridge, she said, I used to come here after the divorce. Sit with a cup of coffee for hours, thinking about what went wrong, and what could come next. I felt my throat tighten. Not with pity. Not with excitement. But with recognition. My own mornings had been filled with the same silence, the same quiet reassessment of mistakes and chances I hadn't taken. I get that, I said, barely audible. We didn't speak much after that. We didn't need to. The tea cooled between us. I watched her flick her eyes toward my hands, noticing how I fiddled with the spoon, how I absent-mindedly traced the rim of the cup. And she noticed. Always noticing. Something risky lingered in the air. Age, experience, the history I didn't have. And yet, there was a pull either of us denied. I imagined her laughing at something I said, imagined the brush of her fingers against mine in passing, imagined her telling me about her sisters in that soft, knowing tone that made every cautionary thought falter. Finally, as if testing a line, she reached across the table to adjust the sleeve of my sweater that had bunched awkwardly at the wrist. Fingers barely touched skin, and yet it carried weight. I didn't pull back. She didn't linger. Just a soft, fleeting connection, enough to make the quiet between us feel alive. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I thought I understood her the next night, until I didn't. The apartment smelled faintly of something sweet again, cinnamon, maybe, or the kind of candle no one really notices until it's gone. She was sitting on the edge of the couch, legs tucked under her, scrolling through her phone with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. I forgot to tell you, she began, then stopped. Her fingers hovered over the screen, twisting a ring absent-mindedly. I waited, cup in hand, pretending the steam rising from it was enough to occupy me. She glanced up, caught me watching, and looked away. That pause, the one that stretched longer than comfort allowed, made my chest tighten. She said again, letting it trail off. I knew she was resisting, in the quiet way people do when they're afraid to reveal how much they want something. Or maybe she wasn't resisting me. Maybe she was resisting the shape of what this could become. The thought of it, her sisters, me, twisting into something messy, impossible, made me hold my breath. We sat like that, sharing silence and tea, until a knock on the door startled both of us. She flinched, glanced at me, then smiled faintly. It's just my sister, she said, almost too quickly. I nodded, pretending I was only half aware, watching as she moved to open it. The other woman, same age, same quiet confidence, stepped in, eyes glancing briefly at me before she noticed the cups on the table. She smiled, just a twitch at the corner of her mouth, and made a casual remark about leaving something in the car. A routine interruption, ordinary, but enough to make the tension fray and snap in its own way. I stayed still, aware of how small the room felt, how our space had shifted. She returned to the couch, curling back into her corner, and the quiet grew heavy again. I wanted to reach out, say something, do something, but words were useless. So I just watched. Watched the little movements, her thumb brushing her lip, her knee twitching against the cushion, the way she exhaled softly, almost like she was testing the air between us. And then it happened, almost without planning. Our hands brushed. A light, accidental touch at first, but neither of us pulled away. My thumb grazed hers. Her eyes met mine, and the room, the clock, the sisters, all of it disappeared for a second. My heart thudded in a way that didn't make sense, and I felt the pull of something I shouldn't name aloud. Her gaze flickered to my lips, then away, back to mine. I leaned forward, instinct, curiosity, desire tangled together, almost closing the distance. Almost. And then the phone rang. Hers, somewhere on the side table, and it broke the spell, sending us both recoiling just a fraction. I swallowed, caught between wanting to stay and knowing I should step back. She didn't say anything. She just let a breath out, and it lingered, warm and unspoken, between us. I left that night with the echo of her hand still brushing mine, the almost confession hanging in the air like a song cut off mid-verse. The evening was quiet, the street empty except for a few scattered cars reflecting the orange streetlights. She suggested a walk casually, like it was no big deal, but I could feel the tension coiling around her in subtle waves. The way she folded her arms over her chest, the slight stiffening in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted to every passer-by. It was all a language I had learned to read without words. We walked slowly, side by side, neither speaking much. The silence carried weight, heavy with things left unsaid. I noticed how her hand brushed against the strap of her bag repeatedly, like she was trying to anchor herself to something solid. "I hate that I feel like this," she said suddenly, voice low. Not to me, not really, but into the space between us. Her gaze was fixed on the cracked sidewalk. "Like I could ruin everything." I stopped, careful not to jolt the moment. "Ruin what?" I asked softly. Her laugh was short, almost brittle. "You. Me. Both of us. I don't even know which of us I'd be saving if I walked away." She paused, fingers tightening around the strap. "I shouldn't want this, not like this." I didn't know what to say. Didn't need to. I just stayed close, letting the silence give her permission to speak without forcing her to. The quiet let her walls lower just a fraction, and I could see the raw edges of her fear and desire tangled together. She stopped walking, turned to face me, and for a moment the street felt impossibly small. Her eyes were glossy, searching mine, as if trying to read what I wanted before I even knew. "Do you ever think about what it would mean?" she whispered. Pause. "If it was more than this?" I swallowed. The air tasted like metal, anticipation, and everything we weren't supposed to touch. "I think about it," I said quietly, almost apologetically. "More than I should." Her shoulders slumped, a brief exhale like letting a balloon deflate slowly. "I'm terrified," she admitted. Her voice barely carried, but it cracked something open inside me. Terrified of what? Being found out? Losing control? Hurting me? Or herself? We didn't move. Just stood on the empty street, the glow of a single lamppost pooling around us. I could feel her heartbeat, just slightly faster than normal, and I knew she felt mine too. The warmth of proximity, the weight of unspoken confessions, made the world shrink to the space between our bodies. She took a small step back, then a sideways glance. "Do you want this?" she asked, barely audible, almost to herself. Her question hung there, trembling, delicate and frightening. I wanted to reach for her, to close the last few inches that separated us. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words caught in my throat. And then, before either of us could act, before a line could be crossed or a choice forced, the street remained empty, the night holding its breath, waiting for one of us to decide. The next morning, her apartment felt emptier than usual. Not physically. Her books, her teacups, her faint scent of cinnamon still lingered, but emotionally. The warmth that had settled there in the past nights had vanished, leaving only the quiet echo of absence. I tried calling. Twice. No answer. Text sat unsent in my drafts, overthought, erased, rewritten, erased again. I thought maybe she was busy, maybe she needed space, but a small, insistent part of me whispered that something had shifted. When I finally saw her again, it wasn't the same. Her eyes, which had always sought mine like sunlight, now flicked away the moment our gazes met. She laughed a little less, lingered a little less, and the brush of her fingers against mine became a memory rather than a habit. "I didn't expect you today," I said softly, in that low, cautious tone I'd perfected. She murmured, adjusting a stray lock of hair. "Things came up." Her vagueness was deliberate. I sensed the edges of a secret pressing against her calm exterior. I imagined all the possibilities, a child I hadn't known about, an ex who still lingered in her mind, something from her past that made her afraid to fall. Days stretched on like that. I found myself retracing our walks in my mind, replaying conversations, holding my breath at imagined touches that never came. I poured coffee that tasted bitter in the quiet mornings, folded napkins with the precision of a ritual, and stared at my phone more than I should. Then came the small, sharp reminder, an accidental message glimpsed on her screen as she picked up a package, her daughter, her ex, a note I wasn't meant to see. Nothing explicit, but enough to plant doubt like a seed. My chest tightened, not with heartbreak, but with something slower, subtler. Confusion. Hesitation. The realization that I was caught somewhere between hope and withdrawal, suspended. I tried to speak with her once, briefly. "Is it us?" I asked, voice faltering. She shook her head slightly, eyes downcast, and smiled faintly. "I don't know," she whispered. And that was it. The door closed without ceremony. No lingering look, no promise. Just the quiet shuffle of life moving on around me while I stayed still, caught in a pause that wasn't mine. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I left her place with the memory of her hand brushing mine, the almost confession suspended in the air. I wanted to call, to knock, to demand clarity, but my fingers stayed still. My footsteps echoed too loudly on the empty street, each one a reminder of what had been and what might never be. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A message. Drafted, unsent. Words typed and erased, always ending with the same empty cursor. The chair at the cafe by the window remained empty too, sunlight falling on a space that no one filled. And somewhere in the distance, I felt her absence like a soft ache, patient, waiting, unresolved. The park bench was cold, the metal biting through my jacket, but I didn't care. She was already there, hands wrapped around a mug of something steaming. The wind tugged at loose strands of her hair, and she let them fall without fuss, as if it didn't matter, but I noticed. I always noticed. I sat beside her, careful not to crowd the space, careful not to speak until it felt necessary. The silence stretched, easy and weighted at the same time. "I didn't think you'd come," she said finally. "I wasn't sure I would," I admitted. My hands wrapped around my own cup, squeezing it like an anchor. "But I couldn't stop thinking about this." My voice trailed off. The word hung between us, vague, slippery. Her eyes searched mine, cautious, patient, and I saw the wall she'd built slowly cracking. "I wasn't sure either," she whispered. We spoke in fragments, sentences breaking in the middle, words swallowed. Each pause carried more weight than anything we could have said outright. She tilted her head slightly, just enough for me to see her expression change, subtle, real. Fear. Hesitation. Longing. "I keep thinking about what we almost let happen," I said, voice low. "And what it would mean if we tried." She exhaled slowly, the sound soft, almost a sigh. Her hand lifted, hovered above mine for a second, then fell back into her lap. "It's complicated," she murmured, not denying anything, but also not agreeing. I leaned closer, careful. "Complicated isn't a reason to not try." "Not if it's this," I said, nodding toward the space between us, the invisible pull I could feel pressing against my chest. She looked down at her mug, then back at me, eyes wide with that quiet vulnerability I'd been craving. "I'm scared," she admitted. Pause. "Of losing control. Of losing you. Of making a mistake we can't take back." I nodded slowly. "I know," I said, words heavy, careful. "But I'd rather risk it. With you. Even if it's messy." She didn't move immediately. Just sat there, letting the words sink in, letting the choice linger in the air. I could see the weight on her shoulders, the careful balancing act of fear and desire, and I waited. Then, finally, she did something small that meant everything. A faint smile, the kind that started in the eyes and spread softly across her lips. Her fingers brushed mine lightly, deliberate yet hesitant, and she whispered, almost to herself, "Okay." I let my hand stay warm, alive, anchored. We didn't rush. We didn't need to. The quiet was enough. No grand declarations, no cinematic gestures. Just two people leaning into something real, fragile, and worth the risk. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the pause, the hesitation, the unspoken words, the near misses, was finally over. The bench creaked under us. The wind shifted. And we stayed there, side by side, letting the world exist outside the small bubble we had finally carved for ourselves. It was 8:47 a.m., and the cafe smelled faintly of black coffee and toast. I slid into our usual table by the window, the chipped ceramic mug already waiting, a quiet reminder that some things had settled into rhythm. She arrived a few minutes later, bag slung casually over one shoulder, hair tucked behind her ear just like she always did. We didn't speak at first. That wasn't necessary. I noticed how her eyes flicked to the steam rising from my cup, how she tilted her head slightly as if memorizing the curve of the rim. I folded the napkin beside my plate, just out of habit, just to have something to do with my hands. "Morning," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. Her smile was small, private, meant only for this quiet corner of the world we'd carved out together. "Morning," I said, letting the word linger. There was no rush, no grand flourish, just a simple acknowledgement of presence, of continuity. We sipped our tea, sometimes black coffee, sometimes wheat green tea, sharing silence in the same way we had from the very beginning. The world outside moved too fast, but here, in the middle of ordinary things, cups, spoons, sunlight catching dust motes in the air, it moved with us. A few weeks had passed. Life was not perfect, never had been, and we didn't pretend it was. There were errands to run, emails to answer, small frustrations that crept in like quiet ghosts. Yet the space between us no longer held tension, only steady warmth. Every glance, every accidental brush of hands, carried the memory of what it took to arrive here: patience, risk, hesitation, and a quiet persistence neither of us had rushed. She laughed at something trivial, the way she always did when she felt safe enough to forget the rest of the world. I noticed the crease at the corner of her mouth and thought, not for the first time, that it had become one of the most comforting sights I knew. Later, we walked to the park bench where so many of our tentative conversations had begun. The meadow was still cold under the morning sun, but we sat close anyway. Her hand found mine without a word. I didn't look away. Not today, not ever again. We stayed like that for a long while. The clock ticked, the world moved, and we simply existed, two flawed people who had discovered a quiet, earned connection. She rested her head lightly against my shoulder for just a moment, and I felt that same private warmth bloom in my chest, like it had been waiting there all along. And as we stood to leave, she glanced at me and said, in a whisper that only I would understand, "Not perfect. Just us." I smiled. That was enough. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?